All right, our final speaker for this year's 31st Ozark Mountain UFO Conference, which is still just amazes me that we're all back here doing this again this many times. It's wonderful. So our final speaker for this conference this year is he became involved in ufology as the Vietnam War ended back in May of 1975 with a personal sighting of UFO-type objects, which locally became known as the Charlie Red Star. It was a recurring UFO flap that was happening in his area. These sightings led to a decade of research into the early 1950s works done by the Canadian government into the flying saucer phenomenon. This also caused him to become the authority on the Canadian government program, and Wilbur B. Smith, that's hard to say, Wilbert B. Smith, who headed that program up. This led to an investigation of the role in the UFO cover-up by the former president of Penn State University. So our next speaker didn't just go, hey, I want to go out and start investigating UFOs. He just jumped right in and started challenging government officials and finding out the really good and hard to get information. So that takes an awful lot of courage to look after the stuff that he has dedicated his life to. So this resulted in a book called UFOs, Area 51 and the Government, which was published in 1991. He proceeded to do almost 3 decades of research into the role of the President of the United States in the UFO mystery. He's considered the world expert on this subject. He's from Canada, figure that out, okay? So it's actually cool because it's better that he did that and looked at our presidents than one of us, really. And it did cause some controversy. A couple of years ago, he had problems getting across the border to come down here and speak at this conference, and we had to do like a FaceTime thing. So it's if you don't think that they're paying attention and trying to silence people who do this kind of research, they do. So, after his decades of research, most of that research on the presidents can be found on his website, which is www.presidentialufo.com, and in his recently published book, The Clinton UFO Storybook. After experiencing a mental download event on February 26, 2012, he turned his research interests away from the nuts and bolts aspect of ufology and toward the roles of consciousness in the UFO phenomenon. This new research has expanded out to the possible involvement of extraterrestrials in modern music, in the phenomenon of inspiration, and downloads in scientific discoveries, inventions, Nobel Prizes, art, books, near-death experiences, meditation, and with individuals known as savants and prodigies. This research is detailed in 2 recent books, The Paranormal World of Music and Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity, which is the basis for a new series on Gaia TV. He's lectured widely in Canada, the United States, and Europe. He has appeared on many television documentaries on UFOs and been interviewed by nearly 100 radio shows, including a number of appearances on Coast to Coast AM. In 2013, he was one of 40 witnesses to testify in front of 6 ex-senators and congressmen in Washington for the citizens' hearing UFO on disclosure. In 2016, he was one of 6 UFO experts who testified in front of a panel of reporters in Brantford, Ontario for the first public hearing on UFOs in Canada. He is the recipient of the Leeds Conference International Researcher of the Year Award and the UFO Congress Researcher of the Year Award. His books include recently released Alien Bedtime Stories, which is 72 articles on UFOs as they relate to the president's consciousness, abductions, and musicians. He is preparing to release the book Managing Magic, the Government's UFO Disclosure Plan, and Tales of Charlie Red Star, which details one of the largest UFO flaps in history. As you know, in the last couple of years, there's a few people that have been talking a lot about disclosure and about the UFOs being real in relation to the government. Like Tom DeLonge is one of these folks. The CIA and the Pentagon have openly been hinting to the public that UFOs exist and that we're not alone in the universe. At the same time, a key CIA official has been hinting that portal technology is real and it exists. And a group called the Cosmic Club has arisen. And this is like pretty new stuff. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody talk about, openly in this kind of context, talk about portals. And so this is groundbreaking stuff. And there's some events that have happened just in the last week that he's going to talk to as best he can with the information that's available. But like really, really recent breaking news. So please join me in welcoming Grant Cameron.
Thank you. You made me sound famous. Beautiful. Okay, I am honored. I used to speak here quite often in the old days, and as I've told numerous people, most of the conferences are in Nevada, California, and I always say to them when I'm there, have you ever been to Eureka Springs? And they go, no. And I say, don't die until you've been to Eureka Springs. I've lectured at almost every conference there is in America. I've lectured in Europe. This is potentially the best conference in the world. I can tell you that. And so I say thank you for giving me the invite to come. It's one of the closest ones for me, even though it's still 16-hour drive. And I appreciate the fact that you lowered the temperature today so I could feel at home. I've actually, as Forrest mentioned, that I have material that has just happened. And so I've been changing the lecture in the last couple of days. I've been up in my room changing stuff, and I actually changed the title late last night. So what I'm calling it now is The Disclosure Circus and the Experiencer Truth. I was just going to talk about the Tom DeLonge operation, because that's basically what people want to know. They want about the New York Times article, the Washington Post, Tom DeLonge. Is there going to be disclosure? What's the government doing? And I have been very involved. The way I play the game is I try to keep an open mind. I have 100 people on a list that I think should know what's going on, that it's important to listen to these people when they talk. And so I see it as a chess game. I was very, very good as a child playing chess. And I quit playing because I never wanted to lose. So I didn't go to try to do the grandmaster thing or whatever. But the way I see the UFO phenomena for me, is that you are playing the game. And the most important part about playing chess is you have to know what your opponent is doing. It doesn't really matter what you're going to do. You do not make a move until you know why the guy across from you moved the piece that he did. If he's an ordinary player and doesn't know what he's doing, well, then he probably doesn't know what he's doing. But he's a very good player. He moved the piece for a reason. So what I have is these 100 people. I keep track of everything they say. This includes very high-level people in the CIA, in defense, and this sort of thing. And my other rule is I always stay one step removed from my victim. So I never, ever interact with any of these people. The odd one I'll interact with, but I usually have someone in between me who is talking to that person, and that person is talking to me. So that's basically the way. I don't want to get in a situation where someone says, I'm going to tell you this, but you got to keep it off the record, you're my friend, and all this kind of stuff. I don't want that. So what I'm saying is pretty independent in terms of people will know that when you tell me something, you might as well stand on the street corner and say it, because I don't really hold anything back. So the first part is called the Disclosure Circus, and this is a circus. It is very frustrating. I've said numerous times, this disclosure part of my research, I'd like to get out of it. I'd like to quit. I think 3 times a day. I got to quit this thing. This is an absolute nightmare. Because what they're doing is they're taking information and they're putting disinformation around it, and they're putting it out and it bounces around, and this is how they're doing it. But then I was talking to people over the weekend, and as was mentioned in the intro, I had a download experience which absolutely changed my life, where a lot of the UFO community sort of wrote me off as having lost it and gone to the woo-woo side. And what I said to them, I said, well, I didn't actually choose to go there. I was sort of dragged there. It was nothing that I did. It was something that happened to me. And so I've talked to experiencers, and I've added this part to the end. And so I was talking to people at the book table where I'm sitting beside Nancy. And I'll tell you, the only drawback to doing this speech is I had to do it after Nancy. That was the first time that woman has ever delivered a speech. And she brought a tear to my eye a couple of times. It was like very powerful. So at my table, I had a lot of experiencers come to me. And as I'll point out, I've added this sort of section to the end. I'm going to show you what former government officials are doing with experiencers. And it's very encouraging. And I wanted to add that to give it sort of an uplift, because what I say, and I will say this probably a couple times in the lecture, unless you talk to experiencers and what they're saying, these are the people. The way I define an experiencer is someone who interacts with the intelligence behind the phenomena. Unless you talk to those people, you will never solve the UFO mystery. We have been doing the nuts and bolts, measure, and all this kind of stuff for 70 years. We have gotten absolutely nowhere. Most people will say they don't know what's going on. When you talk to the experiencers, they will talk to you. The government may not talk to you. The experiencers will talk to you. So I want to add some stuff at the end that talks about some experiencer research that may be very encouraging to the experiencers in this room. So let's go, see if this works. Okay, this is my book called Managing Magic. This was written before this latest circus started with Tom DeLonge, and I actually do write quite a bit in here about Tom DeLonge. And why I call it Managing Magic, because basically it's not UFOs. If you understand what's going on, it's magic. It's what they call in the CIA phenomenology. So it's remote viewing, near-death experiences, ghosts, psychic phenomena, channeling, people who are tapped in, UFOs. It's all the same thing. It's all tied in. And when you understand the phenomena, what's behind this, you start to understand why this stuff is happening. So this is the book that I wrote. And I'm working on a second book, and then I say, okay, I'm going to do this one more, and then I'm getting out of here, because I want to get back to the experiencer, to the consciousness stuff. But I keep getting dragged back in. I got dragged back in on Wednesday. We had come in early. We were in Conway at the archives there. Podesta had joined me, and we were here. And suddenly I showed her my cell phone, and I think we were in the archives at the time, and it's Dan Smith. This is Dan Smith. And he's sort of an indirect spokesman for a guy named Dr. Ron Pandolfi, who is rumored to be the guy who briefed Donald Trump on UFOs and may have briefed the last 6 presidents on UFOs. He's been in the CIA since 1983. He supposedly runs the Weird Desk, which is the phenomenology, all the weird stuff, and head of the CIA UFO desk. What he does, the way they put the story out, so what Pandolfi does is he puts stuff to Dan Smith, and he's been doing it since 1991. Dan Smith was his best man for his second wedding. He puts the stuff out. Dan says, I sit there, now listen. He'll only say it one time. He'll leak something, he'll say it one time. And if anybody asks him, oh, Ron said this, he'll say, no, Dan Smith's making it up. Dan Smith's crazy. Dan Smith does have some weird things. He believes in eschatology. Sometimes he believes like he's Jesus or he's God, he's a Messiah, and he's got two physics degrees, but he has this belief in the eschatology and tying UFOs into the Bible and this sort of stuff. So a lot of people say, that's Dan Smith, don't listen to Dan Smith. And that's what they do. It's plausible deniability. They give it to people who people will say, well, and Ron stays on the sidelines. So Wednesday, we're in the archives and the phone rings and it's Dan Smith. So I usually don't answer his phone calls. So then Katerina's sitting right in the front row here. And so then he phones Katerina and he says, we got to go hold a Grant. Something has happened. Now, this is the story we made some phone calls. Katerina, this is what he put out. They post on Open Minds forum. So this is what he put out. We need to figure out what's going on and why, and who has a need to know. Many of you know for many years I have been laboring under the impression that I was in charge of disclosure. These people, in Managing Magic, I call these people the messiahs. Stephen Greer is one, Tom DeLonge is one, Dan Smith is one. They actually believe their role is to bring disclosure to the world. They firmly believe this. So I call them the messiahs. The filmed incident that may have occurred last night, so this is Wednesday he posts, so the incident occurred Tuesday night. The filmed incident that may have occurred last night may be the test case for disclosure protocol. That's what's being discussed by the stakeholders at the present time. So let me tell you what happened. There's a guy named Joe Firmage. He was a dot-com executive in the 1990s, had a $3 billion computer company. One night, he has a being appear in his room. And the being is a human-type being, like an angelic-type being, and this guy's Mormon, which sort of ties into this. And the being, they're talking about the technology to go into space. And the being basically sort of says to him, and this is on Joe Firmage's YouTube channel. He only has about six videos there. and 2 of them are a need to watch. So he says to him, why should we help you with this technology or whatever? And so Joe Firmage is this super powerful .com guy, says, because I'm willing to die for it. I guess he gets some sort of impression that he's got a download, that something has happened. He basically walks out, quits his job, CEO, just basically shuts it down, starts putting money into UFOs. And he starts putting money into portal technology, into sort of, some people have sort of laughed and said he's building a portal to Mormon heaven, because Mormons have this belief of this planet, and this ties into the UFO thing. So he's building this thing, and apparently put in $90 million. And the story sort of went there, and I would talk to people in Salt Lake, and I'd say, does he have a portal? I'm trying to figure this out. Does he have a portal? Because a portal changes everything. If there's a portal, the nuts and bolts materialistic paradigm of the world is in serious, serious trouble. And I say that's why ufology has never gotten anywhere, is because they still buy into the materialistic paradigm. It's all nuts and bolts, that's all there is. Consciousness is an illusion and all this kind of nonsense. And so I say if portal technology is for real, if you can actually walk through a portal and you're suddenly in another world, everything's changed. Then we have some serious problem with reality that we got to figure out what's actually going on here. So the rumor was that Firmage was working on this portal technology. So I'd ask people in Salt Lake City, and they'd say, you know, he's a crooked businessman. And I said, well, I think most businessmen are like that. Does he have a portal? And then they'd say, well, you know, he's got a drinking problem. Yeah, and he had 3 impaired charges. And they'd say, okay, that's fine, but does he have a portal? I don't care what he does in his spare time. I just want to know, does he have a portal? So the story I'd actually given up last week. I said, this is a total waste of time. And this is what happens in these things, because they're putting it out and they're pulling it back. They're putting it out and they're pulling it back. So the story's out there, and I actually got Ron Pandolfi on camera talking about this portal thing, the only time he's ever been caught on camera. And he pulled the video, but I had it already. So this thing was going, and then I'd given up, because I said, it never turns out. The stuff they put out never gets confirmed. Whereas Tom DeLonge, which I'm going to talk about, some of his stuff actually did come out. So Tuesday night, let me backstep 1 week. So Dan Merritt, who is a former U.S. congressman from the state of Utah, and this is where this is happening in Salt Lake City, gets involved in the program. And Firmage is out of money. He has these problems, these charges against him for whatever. And so Dan Merritt gets involved, and he's been retired for a number of years. He gets involved. He puts $4 million in. And the story is, as of about a week and a half ago, is they've perfected the technology. Now, it's on his YouTube site. You'll see it. They call it the bouncing box. And it's a cage-type thing that sits there, and they have these, like, gyros in it, and they're all spinning in different directions. And they're going faster and faster and faster and faster. And all of a sudden, the box starts to vibrate, and it actually sort of levitates off the ground. So the dispute was, is this technology that Firmage has, is it gravity control, anti-gravity, or is it a portal? So from all the stuff I'd gotten, it appeared, no, he didn't have a portal. The people said, that's disinformation. He doesn't have a portal. He's just working on this gravity thing. So there's a guy's picture I'll show you in a minute is coming along where Tuesday night they have an incident at the portal. So they're trying to get a hold of me, so they can't get a hold of me. So they go to my associate, Katerina, who now lives in Washington. And I'm sorry, Katerina, I got you dragged into this rabbit hole. But they now go to her. And I have a couple of people, as I said, I'm always one step removed from people I'm watching. And so now they go to Katerina. And if they can't get a hold of me, they go to Katerina and say, we need to get a message to Grant. And this is what happened. So they were contacting her, and they were contacting an artist friend of mine, Doug Alt, in New Jersey, and they're trying to say something has happened at the Salt Lake, at the thing. And I got the impression that they'd gotten a film. And during the film, they were filming this object. They had this thing spinning away, and a guy by the name of Kevin Alber was there. And Kevin Alber works for Ron Pandolfi. The original story was that Kevin Alber was a producer in Hollywood, and Kevin Alber was going to put out a documentary on all these, what they call the Avery figures, these people that had interacted with UFO phenomena inside the government. They were going to put out this documentary, and Kevin Alber was going to make this documentary. And he offered me an executive producer, and I said, no, I don't really want to do that. I said, if you want help, I'll tell you whatever I know, whatever, but I really don't want to, I don't really want to be involved. And then he said, well, you can be on the outside. You can be on the inside, you can get 100%. You know all the phone calls, you know exactly what we're going to do. Or you can be on the outside and you get 10 to 15%. And I said, okay, I'll take 10 to 15%. I just don't want to get dragged into, you can't talk about this is this phone call stuff. So I was on the outside, but I still knew sort of what they were doing. And at one point, I'm talking to him, and I said, you know this portal thing, Ron's talking about this portal thing, this crazy stuff. He said, oh no, that part's real. And I said, what, there's a portal? Because I thought it was like science fiction. I thought it was like nonsense. But it was extremely important. Once I heard Kevin Albert say, he said, yeah, I've been through a portal, and that Joe Firmich had a portal. So I got very interested because it's this consciousness thing. It's this thing that it's not as physical a world as you think it is. So yesterday, Katerina flew in from Washington. So we sat down and we phoned Dan and we tried to get the information. I knew what was going to happen. So basically what happens is Tuesday night, they've got this object and the things are spinning and they're there. And apparently Kevin was by himself and he was filming. And then suddenly a portal, am I correct, Katerina? Sort of a portal thing opened or something happened, and a being appeared. And it was blue or green. Was it blue? It was a blue being appeared. And so I said to Dan, so we're trying to get the information. So I said to Dan, okay, so tell me what happened Tuesday night. Because he was desperate to get a hold of me, and he wants me to put it out. And I told him, I'm lecturing in front of a couple hundred people here. What's the deal? What happened? And he said, well, there was an incident. And he sort of starts telling me this story, and then I'm saying, okay, so there was a being? Well, yeah, that's what they say. And then I said, there was a telepathic message? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, so what was the telepathic message? And according to Dan, it was, oh, hi, can we help you? And they caught this thing on film. So I know they're not going to release the film. So I said, okay, so I'm speaking, they're probably not going to release, probably not going to release the film. So I said, okay, people are going to ask me, everybody's going to say, okay, why didn't they release the film? So tell me, Dan, why are you guys not going to release the film? And he goes, well, he said, it might just confuse the situation. There's been lots of these videos around of, beings and orbs and stuff, and I go, oh, okay, so I'll tell him that. And then I said, okay, what's your message for these people then? I mean, you wanted to get a hold of me, you wanted to get all this stuff out, and so you're the disclosure guy, what's your message? And he said, well, you tell the people, we say hi to you, we see you and we say hi to you and you can say hi to us, or something like that. It was some bizarre thing, and then I'm going, okay, Dan, so basically there's no doubt that something happened Tuesday night. So I said to him, I'm trying to get something concrete. So I said, okay, so Ron, the CIA guy, and he's the only operational guy. Most of the people I'm going to talk about today are all retired, and that's part of the game. You have to retire before you can play the game. So I said, okay, so Ron saw the film? And he said, yeah, Ron saw the film. And I said, okay, so Ron think it was significant? Do you think it was? Yeah, he thought it was pretty good. And so that's basically all I can tell you what happened Tuesday night. And I said, oh, and this is yesterday morning. I said, okay, I'm lecturing tomorrow morning. If anything happens during the day, you please phone me. And you can watch this all on Open Minds Forum. It gets pretty annoying because they're talking a lot of philosophy and stuff like this. But that's how they drop this stuff. They put it on a blog. And even Ron himself, he posts as the footman. He's made 2 postings in the last week. And basically it's rhymes and riddles. It's like a poem. And if you know what's going on, if you know what the lake is Salt Lake City, and there's all these sort of things. So that's the latest development that's happened. And this is only one part of this whole stuff that they're leaking out. And they definitely are. And there's 2 teams. So there's the Ron Pandolfi, the CIA guy, and then he has Kevin Albert, he has Dan Smith, his wife, Leah, and they were actually holding meetings. And that's how I got Katerina dragged into this thing. I said, oh, you should come, they're having this meeting, and they're talking about portals, and people would get on, and the wife would actually, talk to people on the internet, and they said they were screening for people, and Katerina ended up being there, and she lives in Washington, so they have a lot of interaction with her, and they were doing this very sort of open thing. So that's the one team. You have the Pandolfi team, then you have the Tom DeLonge team. And there's sort of this competition. I was even asking Dan today, I said, well, you guys said that Tom DeLonge would be gone in 2 years, and you guys would be the guys that bring disclosure. And he said, well, yeah, there's kind of a competition going on. And so you got to remember, there's these 2 teams. But the Tom DeLonge team has produced a lot more in terms of results than the Pandolfi team. This is my latest book. I'll just skip over this. This is one of the 3 messages I've gotten from aliens. I never get them myself. It's somebody in between me. Chris Bledsoe, who is becoming a very famous contactee, experiencer. Lots of government agencies are watching because he has a very high-level contact experience. He's got stuff is happening all the time. And what they do, this is the whole thing why I want to talk about experiencers. The CIA, and I'm not 100% sure Ron said this, but what they said is, because we cannot measure and control the phenomena, we have to resort to watching the people who the phenomena is affecting. And that's why experiencers are so carefully watched, because they're trying to figure out what's going on as well, and they aren't talking to the government. They're talking to people on the street. And so the thing is, they're very interested in these people like Chris Bledsoe. So what he gave me a message, he phoned me the one day and he said, oh, I got a message from the Guardians. This is who he calls the people that he deals with. And he has angelic figures, but these Guardians are the ones that where the thing all started. And he said, they got a message for you. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, their message is that the message is in the music. And I went, oh. Chris, I think you're talking to the wrong guy. And he, well, what? And I said, Chris, I don't listen to music. I have no interest in music whatsoever. I don't play a musical instrument. My whole family is musical. I used to listen to talk radio, and now I listen to UFO interviews 24 hours a day. I'm not into music. And he said, well, the one song you should listen to is Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. And I go, yeah, okay, whatever, Chris. And then he said, and the other song, this is how they drag you down the rabbit hole. Whoever is behind this thing, drag you down the rabbit hole. I have no interest in music. And he said, oh, and the other song you should listen to is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. And I went, Neil Young? Neil Young is one? And I didn't know much about music, but I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, where most people don't know about and probably don't care because it's the coldest major city in the world. And so the important thing to know is that Neil Young grew up there. So when he said Neil Young, it was part of this UFO message thing, I go, Neil Young? So I went and looked at the song, and it's basically the message of a lot of experiencers saying we're treating the world like a gold rush. And when the gold is gone, it's going to become a ghost town. And the silver seeds, the flying saucers, are going to come down, and they're going to take the chosen ones, which is what Yvonne Smith and the big regressionist in Los Angeles calls experiencers, the chosen ones to another planet. And then I was hooked. I went, wow. I mean, this is the message. And I started, and so what I did is I found out that, I don't know, I've got maybe 3 dozen that I suspect major musicians that have been abducted. I go through all the ones, how they get the downloads, how they're tapped in, and that's what it comes down to. The ability to dissociate. Experiencers either were trained or they learned themselves the ability to dissociate, the same as mediums, the same as psychics, the same as when you're in meditation, the same as when you're being regressed, to dissociate the left rational analytical brain and pop into that world and pull the information back. And musicians are very right brain, and they all, at one point, while I was doing the research, I thought the aliens, intelligence, whatever it is, had every single musician. I was convinced. I was looking at musicians and saying, I wonder if this one was. And they all had something behind them. So that was the book that came out of that whole thing, this bizarre connection between music, and this is the whole idea, that frequency, music is frequency, they're using lyrics, and that maybe whatever this intelligence is, it's being used to get messages and feeling into the public and change the consciousness of the world. So this is my Managing Magic. I have the 14 magicians, and the 14 magicians are the guys like Ron Pandolfi. They are the guys who are leaking the material. The 5 messiahs are the guys who go, yeah, I'm over here, yeah, give me this stuff, like Stephen Greer. And Stephen Greer, one of his sources, and he if you've heard this latest interview he does about this little Atacama alien, where they said it wasn't alien, and he goes on and he does a 2-hour interview, and he refers to a high-level CIA guy. It's Ron Pandolfi. So he's using Ron Pandolfi as well. And so, but the messiahs are the ones that carry it, and then the 3 kings, I'll skip over that. This is another new development. It's like in this field, when it rains, it pours. This is some files that were sent to me. I've got 100 pages of this. It looks like there's about 300 pages. What this is an eyes-only study on the UFO subject for President Johnson. And it was done, and I just want to show this slide. I've got 99 pages. I could basically go with what I got now. And there was an 8-man team headed by a guy by the name of Frank Rand, is the guy that ran the program. And he had these high-level government people inside, almost like Tom DeLonge, high-level government people. So when you compare the people from the 1968 study, the Johnson study, to the TSSA, and the TSSA is the To the Stars Academy. That's Tom DeLonge. And for people who don't know Tom DeLonge is brought in by Stephen Greer. He flies Stephen Greer to Los Angeles, puts him in contact to make some movie, provide money. He's sold 30 million albums. He's, a young guy, and he's big on Twitter. He's big on Facebook. He has this access to young kids. So Tom DeLonge is running the one operation, the Eyes Only Study. Now, To the Stars Academy is using, the main guy, his name is Jim Semivan. And the key thing to remember, because people will always say, this is evil government guys, they're trying to throw us off, whatever. What you have to remember with a lot of these people that are leaking this material is they are experiencers. And Jim Semivan I've heard it from two independent sources that he told the whole story, had the beings in his room in 1992 with his wife, and he was blown away. He said, my idea of reality was shattered when that happened. This is a guy who ran covert ops for the CIA for 2 years, and this is why I think a lot of these people are involved, because they're trying to figure out what happened to them. He went into the CIA the day after this experience happened, and he went to Ron Pandolfi, and Ron denies this story, but I heard it from a pretty reliable source, and he said, this happened in my room last night, my wife was bleeding, and this was all going on, and I need to know what happened. And Ron said, you don't have a need to know. And Jim Semivan said, I don't have a need to know, because he was a very high-level CIA guy. He said, you bring your boss's boss in here, and we'll see who doesn't have a need to know. And they brought in George Tenet, the head of the CIA. And Tenet said to Semivan, he said, you don't need this. Pretend this is a one-off. Pretend this will never happen again. This will ruin your career. Do not touch this. And so he played the game. The day, I was told, the day he left the CIA, they briefed him exactly what was going on, and he moved from the white world to the black world, and he started to interact with people in the UFO community. He's a guy who's desperate to find out for himself what actually happened. Now, the TSSA is the Tom DeLonge organization, and what happens with him in 2014, he starts to make contact with these people. So if you look at the chart, you look at Jim Semivan is the TSSA. He's the guy that's running the TSSA thing, and I think he reports to Ron Pandolfi. Ron always says, well, I don't know who these guys are. This is all a big scam. And then you look at Tom DeLonge's flowchart of his people, and they're all CIA. They're all ex-CIA. And it's like, well, what's the chances Ron, who's been in the CIA for like 30 years, doesn't know who these CIA people are? Of course he knows who they are. And we were actually told by Jim Semivan, oh, yeah, he knows what's going on. He just is playing stupid because he doesn't want to get dragged into the story. He's actually running it. So you have them, and then the Eyes Only Study in the 1960s, one of the people on the committee was Arthur Lundahl, who had the same job as Ron Pandolfi, exactly the same job. So you have that correspondence. The TSSA has Robert Weiss. Robert Weiss is the guy who ran Skunkworks. And Skunkworks is always rumored to be the place they back engineer the flying saucers. So Robert Weiss was feeding Tom DeLonge, and on the other side, to the Eyes Only Study, you have Kelly Johnson, who was one of the 8 people on that committee. And then you take a look and you have McCaslin, who was one of Tom DeLonge's, the major general. He was the main guy who that Tom DeLonge was using at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where he ran the lab, where the Roswell stuff was supposedly taken. He was a 2-star general, and the Eyes Only Study had, from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, James Stewart was a 4-star general on this UFO investigation. Then you have Hal Puthoff, who's the main physicist for Tom DeLonge, and this one, that was the only name that was changed. Lee Brocking was the name they gave him, but he was a high-level physicist in a university in California that was working on there. And then you have a general at NRO. Most people don't know. Tom DeLonge has a very high-level general inside the National Reconnaissance Organization. And you take a look in the Eyes Only Study, you have Brock Milway, who was the second head of NRO, who was part of that study. So you got to have a general at NRO if you're going to do a UFO study. And the National Reconnaissance Organization wasn't even known publicly until 1992, 1993. In 1960s, nobody even knew this organization existed. So you see these parallels. It's almost like every time they do one of these UFO things, they pick the same people from the same organizations. So Tom DeLonge started this in about 2014, and he sets up, and the thing that I always try to point out to people, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. People think that Tom DeLonge set this organization up. Absolutely not true. If you believe that, you have missed the whole story. The whole story was that Tom DeLonge was into UFOs. He had a conspiracy website called Strange Times in 2012, and he decides that he wants to try to find out what's going on. Because he's a big rock star, there's a lot of his audience, and he comes in contact with somebody and I think it was the father, and he says, does your father talk about UFOs? Oh, yeah, all the time. So he phones up this guy, and this guy works for Lockheed Skunk Works, and he says, you know, I'm interested, and he's trying to get stuff out of this guy. And the guy says, this is serious stuff. I mean, don't get in a car. If someone comes to you and says, get in the car, don't get in the car. You're talking serious material here. You don't get into this kind of thing. Tom keeps going, and then the guy phones him back, and this is the key to the whole thing. People will say the New York Times basically says, Tom DeLonge set this thing up. This is how it happened. The guy phones him back, and he says, we're having a party in the parking lot of the Lockheed thing, and we'd like you to come down and introduce the president. That's called throwing the fish line out and see if you can ring him in. And of course, what's Tom DeLonge say? Oh, yeah, sure, I'll come introduce the president, as long as I can talk to him for 5 minutes. So he goes on to the parking lot. He talks to the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, who I believe was Robert Weiss. He introduces Robert Weiss. And then they invite him to Area 51. Now, Area 51, George Knapp, who's been working on the Area 51 story for like 35 years, never been to Area 51, and this guy, Rockstar, is there like in a couple of weeks. They say, oh, yeah, come on up. And they bring him up to Area 51. He gets in a secure facility. They got all the white noise. They got the guys with the machine guns, all this sort of stuff. He goes through all these series of stuff, and he makes his pitch. And what he says, and this is true, and this is what you got to remember, the government cannot put anything out. You can't stand the president up. You can't stand the CIA director. So they need someone to share the message. They need someone to tell the message. So that's what Tom DeLonge says. He says, you're messing this thing up. You're not getting the message out. I can get to the people. You can't get the kids. This is Facebook. This is Twitter. This is all this YouTube stuff. You guys can't do this. You need me. And they sold him. And so then he's talking to them, and he gives them his spiel. And the one guy says, you know, this might actually work. And then they say, we got someone you want to meet. So Tom DeLonge is not setting this thing up. He's invited to Area 51. Then they say, we got someone you to meet. And he gets that email that says, meet outside the Pentagon at a certain time in a certain place. And it's in, I think it was Pentagon City is where they met. So he goes to Pentagon City. They have two guys sitting in a room. And the two guys, Tom DeLonge, this rock star guy, sits down. And they say, things like this do not happen in the White House. They do not happen in Congress. They happen when a couple of people like we in this room, sit down and decide among ourselves to move the football down the field. So and these are intelligence guys. So they send him to NASA. And he meets with a high-level person there, and I think with a second person, who I know who the second person is. He goes there, and they talk to him. So now he's got these guys in Washington. He's got these guys, National Aeronautics Space Administration. They send him to Ames on the West Coast. He has a meeting there, and he ends up meeting the General McCaslin. And General McCaslin, I'm pretty sure it was General McCaslin in this meeting, where McCaslin sits there, and they come in, he flies in. He doesn't even leave the area. He's still inside flying in. He doesn't even leave the airport. They meet in a restaurant, and the guy sits down, and he says, it was the Cold War. And every day we knew that we could have a nuclear war and be gone. And it was during that time that we encountered an alien life force, or a life force, or something like that. So this guy sends him. He meets the general. Then they send him to Colorado Springs, and then he meets a guy by the name of General McKay and a colonel. And then he puts out his first book in April of 2016, and he suddenly gets met by Jim Semivan. Jim Semivan comes along and like, where do you get this material in the book? Who are you talking to? And they take 6 intelligence agents, and they put him in a room, in a hotel room in San Diego, and they grill him for 2 days. But then they join the team. He phones up John Podesta, and this will be a little bit later, but he meets up with John Podesta, and John Podesta gets involved. And so this is an important thing to remember. He did not set this thing up. He was set up. They built the team for him to feed material. They figured that they needed him to feed this material. So whether it's true material or no bad material, it is being fed to him. He did not set this organization up, and that's important to remember. There's some conservative elements in this thing that are sort of in the UFO community who basically are saying, don't use the word UFO, don't use the word alien, be skeptical, and saying that there's no government program. And this was sort of pointed at me. There were some interviews that were done that basically said, who are these people? who's got this idea that there's some sort of conspiracy? There's some sort of conspiracy that the government is feeding stuff. Well, that's me. There may be a few other people, but that's definitely me. I've written a number of books about the fact that the government is leaking material. And they say, well, who are these people? Sort of like nutcase piece. Where did they get the idea of a cabal controlling release? And the idea was, no, it's just New York Times. New York Times put out an article, and it's just good reporting by the New York Times. And so they're looking at me and saying, well, where do you get the idea there's somebody feeding this material? There's some sort of conspiracy. And I guess it would come down to the fact that December 16th, and you probably all know this, on December 16th last year, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Politico all did a UFO story that took them 2 months to research, and none of those papers had ever done the New York Times had done one straight-up UFO piece. But the Washington Post does not do UFO stories. So suddenly 3 newspapers, all on the same morning, go with this major story about the fact that, oh, by the way, the government is investigating UFOs. They spent $22 million over 5 years, and they released these films. So you've probably seen these, the Nimitz film and the Tic Tac film and all. They released these films. So where would we get the idea that that was a setup? Well, it's very obvious. If all 3 newspapers who never do UFO articles all suddenly the same day go with a major thing and say UFOs are for real, then it would mean that somebody was behind that release, because they normally don't do UFO articles, and they wouldn't all come out on the same day. So this goes back to knowing who the players are, and one of the players is Bob Bigelow. He's the guy in Las Vegas who has the aerospace company, billionaire guy. Used to have Comfort Inns and Bigelow Tea and this sort of stuff. Very, very rich guy. And he gets interviewed in 2013. And as I said, I don't really listen to music, but I listen to a lot of interviews, like 5 or 6 times. He does an interview in 2013 with George Knapp. And George Knapp says to him, is there a program? Is there a program to leak this material out? And this is what Bigelow, who deals with all the agencies in Washington, because he's got this, he's putting pods on the space station and stuff like that. He said, I think there is sub rosa an effort of sympathy towards this in other areas and other circles that might be government connected, that might feel the time is right for more honest delivery of the truth as to the existence of the phenomena. So this is 2013. Bigelow basically said in 2013 the government is doing something, and he would know. So this is another indication that the government is actually working behind this thing. I say there's 3 different disclosures. A couple of people inside TSSA say, no, it's not right. 1973, 74, there's actually Bob Emenegger, who used to be, I didn't see him at the conference this year. He lives in Fayetteville. He had a thing in 1975. He was brought in by the U.S. government to do a documentary. They would give him, he had access. He could walk in the Pentagon without signing in. He and his partner, Alan Sandler, put this documentary together called UFOs Past, Present, and Future. And in that part of that documentary, they do a thing called the Holloman Air Force Base story, which is where they got the idea for, I believe, the idea for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They have the thing, it's landing, they have all these cameras going, happens at Holloman Air Force Base, and even Hal Puthoff, who's one of the main people in To the Stars, actually says, because they came to me looking for the film back many years ago, and the fact was that they say this was an actual disclosure effort by Richard Nixon to get out information. It was actually planned. And in the 1983, Bob Emenegger actually got a second offer to do another documentary in 1983, and the first question he asked when they said, we'd like to do this again. You did this documentary in the 1970s, you put this stuff out, the government liked it, we'd like to do another one. And he went, who's behind this? Is this Ronald Reagan? And they wouldn't answer his question. So they put that out. Then I maintain, absolutely, the 1988, and you can see these things on YouTube. The first one, the documentary is called, the second one is on the internet. It's called UFOs That Has Begun, 1979. The second is called UFO Cover-Up Live. It was done in the final days of the Reagan administration. Reagan was very much into UFOs. It leaked the idea of Area 51 is on a flowchart on that documentary. The parapsychology unit at the DIA, which would not be declassified until 1995, was on the flowchart. They showed this flowchart. That's where the idea of the Avery came from, the Condor, the Falcon, the live alien, Area 51. That was all in this documentary before it ever was made public. And this is this slow thing that comes from the Brookings Institute report from the 1960s. They said if extraterrestrial life is discovered, it could be dangerous. The lower civilization, which is us, may disappear. That's the way it seems to work in history, and that you have to acclimatize people to what's going on in order to stop this from happening. So 1988, I maintain, is another major disclosure effort that they made. They disagree with me, but I absolutely maintain that that is one. And 2017, and they're also maintaining that this is not a disclosure effort, what's going on. They say the AATIP program is not a faux disclosure program. And I would agree. The AATIP program was not set up for disclosure, but they did leak the AATIP program as part of a disclosure plan. So the AATIP program is not a disclosure plan. It was a plan to investigate UFOs that were around huge military operations, like exercise, like the Nimitz thing, where they have a carrier and they have a destroyer and they have planes and they have this whole armada of ships and stuff like are moving through that have a lot of protection. All these UFOs were showing up for like 2 weeks at a time, and they were being filmed on the East Coast, on the West Coast, and that kind of stuff is what they leaked. So it wasn't so much that it was a program, but it was part of a disclosure program. Now, what they say is that what happened, if you followed the To the Stars story, Lou Elizondo is one of the main characters. He retires the day before he joins Tom DeLonge, who has a news conference on October the 11th of last year. This is when they make the announcement. They don't put out a press release. It's a very quiet news announcement the day before Lou Elizondo quits. And the story that they put out is that Lou Elizondo was frustrated. He put his resignation letter in there. It never got to the Secretary of Defense, but he was frustrated and he wanted to go. And that's the only reason this thing came out, is because Lou Elizondo was retiring and he wanted to get the information that we need to study this more. And yet, when you listen to Tom DeLonge, like I do, you go back and listen to the interviews for the 5th time, and he said, I hired him away. He knew about him long before. And he went in and hired Lou Elizondo away for this program to get him into these group of people. So there are, as was done in the intro, there's what's called the Cosmic Club. And what we're told, there's over 40 people involved in this thing. A lot of them are academics. A lot of them are people who are sort of not very much involved. They know what's going on. They're being asked questions and stuff. And they don't want to be exposed because they're academics. They're in university stuff. Rice University, there's one. North Carolina, Durham, there's one. And so these people don't want to be exposed. But the whole team has been put together. This is not a couple of people. So this is DeLonge. So this is 2015. Tom DeLonge, he actually posts the picture on Facebook of the Area 51 as he's going in at the gate. And we have, as I said, the Messiah thing. You have a situation where Tom DeLonge believes that he's going to get this thing out, and he builds a team. This happened once already. If you've been around since before Jesus was a carpenter like I have in this field, you know that Bill Moore in the 1980s was what they considered the top researcher in the 1980s. He wrote the first book on Roswell. You would not know Roswell. That's where the name Roswell didn't happen at Roswell. It only is called the Roswell because Bill Moore wrote a book in 1980 called The Roswell Incident. When he put that out, it had all sorts of major witnesses. It wasn't hypothetical. He had intelligence officers and people that had been there, and it was called the Roswell Incident. And he was contacted, almost like Tom DeLonge, exactly the same thing. He was phoned up, and all these guys have ego. You need ego. You need ego to run this thing. You like me, I would just go, forget it, I don't need this. I'm not going to go through this nonsense. But these guys have ego. So Bill Moore had the ego, and Tom DeLonge has the ego to pull this thing off. And they phoned up Bill Moore after the book was published, days after the book was published, and said, you're the only guy who knows what you're talking about. And he went, yeah, that's true. And then about a week later, he's on his book tour, and this book, I think, sold 1 million copies. It's a huge selling book. And he was on the book tour, and he got a phone call from off at Air Force Base, and the second guy said to him, you're the only guy who knows what you're talking about. And then they drag him in, and they gave him what became known as the Avery, which was 24 sources, 24 inside sources. Now, Tom's got 40. Stephen Greer claims he's got 550, and that's the thing. They're using these people to feed material into to the public. So I mentioned this before. Tom met this general at Colorado Springs. He goes to the Pentagon. They give him this email, go to the Pentagon. Christopher Mellon, they put this thing out. Well, the videos have come out and that they were declassified, and it happened because Lou Elizondo retired. What you have to know is that those videos were already being declassified last August, long before Lou Elizondo ever decided to retire. So again, it shows that this stuff was being done. Rogan, if you saw the interview with Joe Rogan with Tom DeLonge, he says to him, he says, where are you getting this stuff from? All this stuff. And he said, take a guess. Look around at the people that I'm surrounded by. And this is true. He has very high-level people that he's surrounded by. So Rogan said, people around you are telling this stuff? And he said, well, I don't want to get into that. People that I'm surrounded by, and I'm very close to this stuff. So then he starts to cover his sources. Once he starts pushing, who are these people that you're talking to, then Tom DeLonge backs off. Here's Jim Semivan. He talked with a friend of mine, Melinda Leslie, and I knew this interview was taking place, and we've still kept quiet who set up the interview. It was a very, very important person, and there was a second person that was helping support. This is an experiencer who was helping get this interview had to happen, but the woman that set it up is a very major sort of name, but we're not going to release that yet. But he does an interview where we all have these questions. We decide what we're going to ask him. We knew this interview was going to take place. And my main question was, is it constitutional? And I really didn't get an answer, or Melinda really didn't ask the question. It was, is this legal, is this constitutional? Are you following the law, or are you a bunch of guys that are rogue and just doing what you want to do? And I believe it's constitutional. I believe this is being signed off by the President of the United States, by high-level people. Everybody knows down the chain of command what's going on here. And he said the part that he was doing was constitutional, but he didn't really answer, he wasn't asked the right question. So meets Podesta. Now, Podesta was the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. That's one of the people he did contact. He contacts John Podesta, and he says to John Podesta, he gives him his spiel, you know, I'm the guy, I can get to the young people, you guys are messing this thing up, you're not getting the message out, you need me, and all this sort of stuff. And he says John's listening, and then John says, well, I'm kind of busy, phone me back in a couple of months. And Tom figures, I've lost the guy. It's a total waste of time. He didn't get the pitch. And John phones him back 2 months later, and he says, okay, I'm ready to play. This is important. I need you to fly to Washington right now. Now, this is the key. This thing's not being set up. John says, this thing's significant, fly to Washington right now. So John Podesta gets involved, and he starts helping. And I think the reason he waited the 2 months is he has to go and say, in the government, who's talking to Tom DeLonge? What's going on? Is somebody running an operation or something? And he needs to get permission to get involved. But 2 months later, he phones up and he said, okay, I'm ready to play, fly to Washington, D.C. So Tom DeLonge flies to Washington to meet with John Podesta, and he's in a video that hasn't been released, a documentary yet. And he said, I didn't phone him back because I didn't believe that he was. So here's John Podesta, and it all falls apart with the WikiLeaks emails. John Podesta's emails are leaked, and even though it was a bad thing, it was actually good for the UFO community because it actually exposed everybody. All the correspondence between Tom DeLonge and John Podesta was being shown. And this shows another thing that shows that there are people behind that are pushing this issue. John Podesta does this tweet in February of 2015. The next day, he's leaving the Obama administration. He's a chief advisor to Barack Obama. He leaves. The day he leaves, he puts this tweet. Finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again, which means he tried it with Bill Clinton and he couldn't sell the issue. Once again, I'm trying again, once again, not securing the hashtag disclosure. Hashtag disclosure was what Stephen Bassett was using. They were sending tweets. They were tweet storm. They had millions of tweets going into congressmen and stuff. So he uses this hashtag disclosure of the UFO files. The truth is out there, and then he copies Marie Dowd. And it was actually Steve that figured this out. It took us a while to figure out why would he copy a reporter at the New York Times. And the reason he copied Marie Dowd is in 1997, if you remember the Roswell report, they had come out with this report that said, well, first they came out with the report that said it was a mogul balloon. And then Clinton saw the report, and Clinton was very upset, and he made this speech in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he said, you know, I've got this letter from Ryan, and I never did find the letter. There's got this letter from Ryan, and Ryan, here's the answer to your question. No, as far as I know, a UFO did not crash at Roswell, New Mexico, but if they did crash, and there were bodies, they didn't tell me, and I want to know. And that meant the first Roswell report didn't have bodies. Explain to me where the bodies explain. So they had to do a second Roswell report, which came out in 1997. That's the one where they said, well, these people were reporting these little 4-foot gray aliens, and the reason they did was because in 1953 we dropped 6-foot-tall wooden dummies with Air Force uniforms with parachutes on them that had a thing, $25 if you bring this thing back in, and people mistook them for 4-foot-tall aliens 5 years later. And so when that story was broke, if you ever saw the video of the guy doing the news conference, the reporters are absolutely falling off the chairs laughing. This is the craziest thing I ever heard. And Marie Dowd actually writes an article in the New York Times and says, this is the stupidest thing I ever heard. In fact, this actually proves Roswell took place, because this is the stupid thing I ever heard. And that's why he copies Marie Dowd. So you see what they're doing. It's not direct. It's this indirect thing behind the scenes. You got to see who they're talking to and what's going on. So Marie Dowd, but she never did get involved. She was copied on this, but she never did play the game. Okay, so Leslie Kean, this was exposed in the WikiLeaks email where some guy who wrote a book on Apollo 11 talks about some UFO sighting, a military thing that had never been exposed. So Leslie writes to John Podesta, and she said, another confirmation of yet more documents from the public. The knowledge belongs to the people under the law. We can get the ball rolling during this transition window, perhaps a quiet meeting with the right people before your next assignment. I have the perfect briefing package. So you can see behind the scenes, Leslie Kean, who was one of the articles on the New York Times, a thing that came out on December 16th, is working with John Podesta. John Podesta wrote the foreword to her book on UFOs, and she's in the background, and they're trying to move disclosure, because John Podesta is big time into UFOs. He's made numerous statements that we've got to get the truth out, and so that's where that came from. Okay, this goes to the most important part of the WikiLeaks thing with UFOs, and I'll just skip the slides, but I'll just tell you what happened. So he's dealing with John Podesta, and he wants to introduce him to Robert Weiss, who's this guy at Lockheed Skunk Works, and the general at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they set up a go-to meeting on January the 25th, 2016. John Podesta doesn't really know how to use a computer, so they're using a go-to meeting, and this is his secretary. His secretary is saying, okay, the meeting's set for January 25th. I'll show you how to set up this meeting, John. We'll do it on it's like an open video conference thing called Go-To Meeting, and I'll set it up for you. And basically, all the people show up. Podesta's there. He's running the meeting. There's Robert Weiss from Lockheed Skunk Works. There's General McCaslin, and then there's General McKay, and there's no doubt the meeting is not about his next musical record. It's about UFO disclosure. And John is hosting this meeting. And this gets exposed when the WikiLeaks thing gets exposed, suddenly they realize that they have this meeting. And they have the meeting, and then there's actually, I'm going to skip all these slides because I want to get to the experiencer part. They actually have the meeting. And the funny thing was, John Podesta, when he was in the Clinton White House, was always known as the X-Files man in the Clinton White House. And he actually was interviewed a number of times about it, and people would joke, and he had X-File paraphernalia in his entry room into his office and stuff like that. And he would always say that when X-Files was on, he didn't care what was going on at the White House, he went home and watched X-Files. So he was called the X-Files man, and in one of the newspaper articles in the 1990s, he actually says to the reporter, he said they actually phoned Area 51 to find out what was going on. Is something going on there? And then he said, they told me nothing was going on. But the strange thing was, so you have John Podesta in the 1990s. He's phoning Area 51. They have this meeting on January 25th, this go-to meeting where all these guys are talking about UFO disclosure. And then a month later, one of the WikiLeaks emails that was released was Robert Weiss, Tom DeLonge writes John Podesta, and he says, oh, Robert Weiss contacted me. Now, this is the Area 51 guy. He's working at Area 51. He runs the Area 51. He phoned me, and he said, can you ask John if there's any follow-up? Which indicated that during that January 25th meeting, John had promised to do something. We're talking about disclosure. Okay, I'm going to try to do this. And Weiss is saying, is there any follow-up? And even any little thing, he would accept. What's going on? So in the 1990s, John Podesta is phoning Area 51, and in 2016, Area 51 is phoning John Podesta to find out what's going on. So this was all exposed by WikiLeaks, and what happened was these three generals were outed, and it was like, they had to redo the program because these guys were suddenly exposed, even though nobody went and interviewed them, and that's the problem. We know who these people were, we know what their involvement was, and in the one, and I'll skip the email, but in the one, General McCaslin actually writes him a memo. And this comes to this thing about the people are saying, well, what's this idea that there's these people actually doing this thing behind the scenes? This is crazy, these tinfoil hat people. He actually writes a memo that was released, or an email that was released in the WikiLeaks when it all came out, where Tom DeLonge sends it to John Podesta, and he said, my main guy, who's this two-star general at Wright-Patterson, has ideas on how we should do this. and he's talking about the fact that you've got to get agencies to know what they're doing. They all have to write supportive memos, and then you've got to drag in NASA. If you don't have them in there, it's all going to fall apart. And he's basically telling them how to do disclosure. And this was exposed. So suddenly these generals, and people now still feel these generals are gone. And I know from the inside, they aren't gone. They just made it look like they had disappeared. But what they do is they bring out the B team. So you have the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, and then you have this head guy at Wright-Patterson, head guy at Space Command. These guys are involved. Then when they do the news conference, so it all sort of breaks down. 9 months later, they have the news conference, and they have what I call the B team. So they got not the head guy from Lockheed Skunk Works, they got sort of the second in charge, this Steve Justice. And he suddenly, I retire, and he joins the Tom DeLonge team. So you have that guy, and then instead of the two-star general, you have Elizondo comes out. He's like a junior defense guy. And then you have Mellon, who's a defense guy, who comes out instead of McKay. So you have I call them the B team. And they bring them out, and the generals, they say, oh, the generals had to, they had to pull out and stuff. But from what I'm told, the generals did not pull out. Now let me skip. This is all the emails, and I've done some updates. My YouTube channel is White House UFO, and we have put a lot of updates. When this story was breaking, I was doing updates every couple days, and they're half hour long. So there's about 7 hours of updates where I go through all these different things. Tom DeLonge puts out the book. So you have this meeting January of 2016. In April of 2016, he puts out Secret Machines Chasing Shadows. This is the one where the CIA descends upon him. And they put him in a room in San Diego, and 6 intelligence agents for 2 days start to say to him, how do you know this? Who are you talking to? And according to Tom DeLonge, when they heard who he was talking to, they went, whoa, okay. And they joined the team. And that's when Semivan gets involved, and they start helping him as well. Here he says 8 elite advisors, each of who has held the highest positions within the military. This is General McCaslin. This is the guy from Wright-Patterson. Let's just skip through this. There's Robert Weiss, and who just retired I think he just retired a couple days ago. He's now free to get involved in UFOs. And the other thing that I don't think people realize is that the president was involved. I always maintain the president knows what's going on, and this thing has to be green-lighted. You're not going to run an operation like this if the president doesn't know, because the president is responsible. If the CIA does something really stupid, they're not going to go to the CIA, they're going to go to the president. He's responsible. So people don't realize, because I did the presidents, that no president until Bill Clinton talked about UFOs. And people will say, oh, Ford did. He talked about it before he was president. He said, he was in Michigan, and he said, we should take the officials who are involved in this thing, we should put them under oath, and we should force them to tell us what's going on. The day he took the oath of office to become president, he never used the word UFO ever again until after he left the White House. When he was in the White House, he never used the word UFO. Same as Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter said, I will release the UFO files except for the classified material that deals with weapons. When he got in the White House, he never used the word UFO. It wasn't until Bill Clinton came along, and that's why I wrote the Clinton book. The Clintons were in all their speeches. They were just like hammering this thing with UFO references. So it didn't start till the Clintons, and Obama was really bad at it. He was talking about aliens all the time. And the thing was that it wasn't in response to a question. He was actually bringing it up. And it's the plausible deniability. The president, I maintain, my personal view, the president is running the cover-up. And they don't want you to know the president is running the cover-up because everybody knows, even I have the president's phone number. I know what the switchboard number is. 2,000 reporters would start phoning the White House and want a news conference, and it will all unravel very fast. So what they want you to think is there's an evil cabal, and you're going to spend the next 70 years running down a dark alley looking for the evil cabal, and you're never going to find it because it's not. It's the president of the United States that's running it. So what I say is the president has to greenlight this thing. And if you look at what Obama was doing, Obama did greenlight this thing. He was hinting at it. He was going on the Kimmel show. Bill Clinton showed up on the Kimmel show. They were sort of indirectly using the word, dropping the thing. And the main one that he has is an interview he does with GQ magazine in November of 2015. This is just when Tom DeLonge starts. And this is sort of like where he gets the green light. And again, he does not have to bring this up. This is the question. Have you ever said, give me the JFK assassination files. I want to read them. Give me all the secret stuff. That's the question. Got nothing to do with UFOs. And Barack says, I got to tell you, it's a little disappointing. People always ask me about Roswell and the aliens and UFOs, and it turns out the stuff that's going on that's top secret, isn't nearly as exciting as you'd expect. In this day and age, it's not as top secret as you'd think. So basically it tells this guy, the UFO stuff that's top secret isn't as exciting as you think it is. And I always make this joke. The guy either had a stroke or fell asleep or something because he just handed it to him. And what does the guy ask him? Next question, would you like to be a Supreme Court Justice? I mean, he gave it to him and the guy didn't, and that's the problem is we don't follow up on it. We're like nobody chased the generals when they were outed. Nobody went after this thing. When the question was asked in the White House, nobody followed, I'll do that later, but nobody follows up on some of these claims. How much time have I got? Okay. 2015. This is important to realize. Stephen Greer tells a story that he tried to get this briefing material, and I've been at the Clinton Library, I saw it, and it actually says on the front cover, President did not read. Somebody wrote on it, President did not read. Stephen Greer said he read it, he kept it in the bathroom or whatever was going on there. And it was a huge pile of people. It was like 600 pages of material, documents, and all this sort of stuff. So Bill sent, apparently, Stephen Greer tells a story that a friend of Bill, an FOB, a friend of Bill, comes back and says, the president can't do this. The president is afraid that if he does this, he's going to end up like JFK. And Stephen Greer laughs, and the guy says, no, I'm serious. He said, he can't do it, but you can. And that's what you got to remember. I believe this firmly. That's what they want. They want us to do it. They want some way to take us off the hook. So when you see the Tom DeLonge operation, you see what's going on. What you've seen is they have moved the whole operation to Bob Bigelow. And Bob Bigelow is private industry. Bob Bigelow now controls basically all the UFO, from 2007 on, all the material, all the reports, all the hardware, basically controls the whole thing. All sorts of material. And he controls it, but he's private. So if Bob Bigelow says it's for real, then the government's off the hook. And so the situation is that you have to be retired. That's why these people are retired, because once you're retired, then, that guy's just a former government, he doesn't know what's going on, and he takes it off the hook. You could anytime you want. I say there's only 3 options. If you want to disclose what's going on, you can stand the President of the United States up this afternoon, have a news conference, show the bodies, show the craft, it's over. You can disclose. So they're not disclosing, no matter what anybody says, and they have no intention of doing, dropping the bomb like that. And if they want to cover up, I come from Canada, and I say the United States of America is the only country where this is happening, where they're leaking documents, leaking whistleblowers, all this sort of stuff. Every other country in the world, they ask me, they always say, oh, you do the President of the United States, you do U.S., what's going on in Canada? What's the government doing? I always say the same thing. I haven't got the foggiest notion. I don't even know if they do UFOs, because I don't talk about it. I mean, it's like saying, it's a crazy thing where people think that they're throwing out disinformation, and it's sort of like saying, well, some guy's cheating on his wife, so he goes to his wife and tells her he's having an affair with Sally, when actually he's having an affair with Jane, so she doesn't know he's having an affair with Jane. It doesn't make any sense to go and say, you're doing this when, it's just nonsensical. So what happens with Hillary, you see when Hillary gets the questions, Hillary never brings up the subject. John is saying, just before this incident took place, this is Damon Steer, who is a good friend of mine now. Damon Steer asked her the question, just before that big meeting, that January 25th, end of 2015, the last day, he asked her the question, what do you think about UFOs? And she said, we should investigate this, we should find out what's going on in Area 51 and stuff, but she never brings up the subject. She only answers 3 questions during the campaign. And John is pushing. So people say, well, no, they're covering up. John Podesta said 2 months before, she does an interview with Lena Dunham. And John says he tweets, and John very rarely tweets. He tweets, he says, good interview, Lena. Next time, ask her about the aliens. So here's $1 billion. It takes $1 billion to run for president. And if John didn't know what he was doing, he's a very smart guy, he could have gone down in history as the stupidest man that ever lived. You just destroyed $1 billion presidential campaign by bringing up aliens. But he does. He pushes it numerous times. He pushes this thing. Ask her about aliens. So Damon Steer asks her. She answers the question. Then she's asked on the Breakfast Club. Then she's asked by Kimmel. And every time she's very positive and says, yeah, we should get this. We should release this. And then what happens is she loses the election. So the thing was supposed to, and I had inside sources with Tom DeLonge. There was a contactee. They wanted to do his movie thing because it's a very bizarre story. And he told me that there was going to be high-level officials. And I remember, I was told before this actually happened, I was told there's going to be high-level officials who are going to come out, they're going to out themselves, and they're going to say that UFOs is real. And in my mind, I was going, yeah, and the cow jumped over the moon, the little dog laughed to see such fun, and You know, it was just insane. There's no way high-level government officials are going to come out and say, I'm this official and this thing's for real. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. So Hillary, this is the thing. Hillary doesn't answer the questions. She answers the questions, but she never brings up the subject. And that's the thing where they want us to do it. They want us to sort of force it to get the issue out. So Hillary is involved, and then when she loses the election, they have to redo the whole thing. Then they have to, because Tom DeLonge, I was told it was going to happen in the Christmas of 2016. And Hillary lost the election, and they didn't actually have the news conference until the next October. So there's this long delay, and people are saying, Tom DeLonge, it's a big scam. He doesn't, he's trying to, whatever. He's a crazy guy. Nothing ever happens that he says. And the thing was, they had to redo the thing because Hillary was out of the scene. They had to reestablish how were they going to do this. I believe firmly that this thing was in operation for a number of years because I was in contact. Here's another one with Barack Obama. He appears on the Ellen Show with this little Macy, this little 6-year-old girl who's an expert, knows everything about every president. And so Ellen says, and later on, Ben Hansen does a review. He does he's an expert and FBI guy, so he does analysis of people's motions and facial expressions and stuff. And he had done Bill Clinton, and he did Barack Obama. And then this one, so when this happened, I sent it to him. I said, do this one. What happened? And he's the guy that picked up that they were reading off cue cards. This whole thing was planned. And Barack is looking straight ahead reading off the cue card, and she's reading off a small cue card down here. And they actually show the cue cards that they used for her. It had little drawings because she can't read yet. So they had these little drawings for her cue card. So they say, well, you're the expert. What would you like to know from the president? She said, I want to know if aliens exist. And then Barack, this is what Barack says. He says, the truth, Macy, is we, and then he sort of stumbles and hesitates, and he sort of stumbles and hesitates again, haven't actually made direct contact with aliens yet, but when we do, I will let you know. And you got to remember, the key part was when Ben Hansen did the review, and when I looked, I went, you're right. They're reading off cue cards. This is all planned. So Barack goes out. February 2016, CIA puts out on their webpage, they've always said, we're not involved in UFOs, and suddenly they've got a thing, how to investigate a UFO sighting, on their webpage. And it's like a straight-up piece, how to investigate a UFO. And they're not involved. 2017, just 2 days before Barack Obama, like I mentioned in 1988, UFO cover-up live happened a couple days before Reagan had left the administration, and Barack actually drops like 12 million pages of secret material, and it's remote viewing material, it's UFO material, drops it onto the internet 2 days before he leaves. And here's the one, the latest one, where Barack he's doing a fundraiser thing for something or other on the Kimmel Show, and he does this thing where he said, they said, if you contribute to this thing, if you get involved, he said, I'll share my files on the aliens. I know how badly he, which is Kimmel, wants to see them. And then the guy off set says, you can't do that. You can't do that. They're classified. And then Barack adds, he says, but I have them. They're right here in my desk. And the guy said, no, you can't release them. And he goes, oh, okay. And this is the thing. They put this stuff, they're dropping this stuff indirectly to acclimatize. And you got to remember, this is going on the same time as this Tom DeLonge operation where they're putting material out. And this is the deal that when a president talks about something, this happened with Jimmy Carter with the stealth fighter, this happened with Barack Obama. Barack Obama was the guy that released the Area 51 thing. He was giving an award to Shirley MacLaine, and during that thing he said, he makes a speech, he says, I was, when you become president, everybody asks you what happened at Area 51, and I didn't know, so I phoned up Shirley MacLaine to find out what was going on. And then everybody laughs, and then he goes, I'm probably the first president ever to use the word Area 51. At that moment, it's declassified. When the president talks about something, it's declassified. So that's what happened to stealth fighter. And so you have Barack starting to talk about UFOs, and that's why I say he's greenlighting this stuff. You don't realize what's going on in behind the scenes. They have to rework the thing, and this is what I'm going to get to at the end here. So the AATIP program is one of the parts of the Tom DeLonge thing. They released this AATIP thing. They have these reports. There's 38 reports. Most of them are like theoretical papers on space propulsion, as far as I know. 2 of them are classified, but it's not really going to tell you what's going on with the intelligence. The videos, and this is where I maintain it's a total waste of time with the videos. You can watch that Tic Tac video for the next 70 years. All you're going to say is, Yeah, this is pretty strange, and no, I don't think we built that. That's all you're going to learn. You say, well, where do they come from? What's the message? Well, I don't know. It's just a video. And that's the thing. It doesn't get you anywhere. And the hardware, same thing. Linda has worked a lot on the hardware, and she's sort of more involved than I am in the hardware. There's a lot of hardware on this thing, and but it'll tell you this is very strange material. We didn't build this stuff, but it doesn't tell you what's actually going on. It's not until you talk to the experiencers that you learn what's going on. Here's an event that happened when the video stuff was released by the New York Times. Of course, there was a question came in the White House press room, and you got to realize again, the reporters just don't ask questions. There was a question asked in January of 1954. There was a question asked of Bill Clinton's press secretary about Hubble in 1997 when he released his book, which was when Bill Clinton said to Hubble, "Go out and find out who killed JFK and are there UFOs." There was a question asked, and in the press, the girl that asked the question, Deborah Orrin, said, "I asked the question," and they said, "No, we gave that to the alien to do." Walked around the question, so she said, "Is what Mr. Hubble writes in his book true?" And the press secretary said, "We're not going to comment on what private people put in their private books." And she said, "I sat there and I waited for somebody in the room to follow up. And they all rolled over and played dead because they were afraid to lose their press credentials." Nobody wants to ask the dumb UFO question. You worked your way up all this time, and suddenly you're in the White House. You're not going to ask the dumb UFO question. So it was actually asked by, well, let me give you first. This is Sarah Sanders is the press secretary. Her father is actually Huckabee, who ran for, he's run for president a number of times, Arkansas, I think he's former governor of Arkansas. And he was asked about UFOs in 2008, and he said, "I believe in GOD, not UFO." So he was actually asked about the UFO question. So his daughter takes the question, and the guy in the bottom right-hand corner was the guy, Jordan Fabian. Now, I've tried to talk to him. He asked the question, and of course everybody's laughing when he's asking the question, and he basically says, "Is Donald Trump..." Yeah, I asked the wrong question, but who cares? He says, "Is Donald Trump interested in UFOs, and is he going to refinance this AATIP program to investigate UFOs?" And she says, "Well, I haven't really talked to the president about that, but I'll ask him and get back to you." And she didn't. And I say the reason she didn't get back to him is you can't drag the president in. The president doesn't know about Russia. He doesn't know about Iran-Contra. He doesn't know about Monica Lewinsky. He doesn't know about Whitewater. The only thing he knows about is the good stuff, the good economy. Oh, we got new jobs. He'll take responsibility for all the good stuff, but the bad stuff, it's plausible deniability. You move the president away from that stuff because you can have the Secretary of Defense go down, the Secretary of the State. You can have anybody go down, but if the president goes down, the whole country goes down. So the president is always protected. So she didn't come back. These are three, when Hillary was doing theirs, these three asked the question, and the one on the bottom right, April Ryan, they asked the first two questions. When the New York Times did a story and said, "Oh, Hillary said she's going to disclose," when the New York Times does a story, then everybody goes, "Oh, it's real." And then all the media pick it up because the New York Times did it. So they asked the question, and then April Ryan, about 4 days later, asked the question because nothing's really happening, and she says to the press secretary, she says, "Is Roswell real? Is this classified? Like, what's going on?" And the press secretary starts to take a drink of water, and she goes, "Look, you're doing the dance. You're trying to walk. You're going to walk around this thing. You're going to try to figure out how to get away from this thing." She said, "You're not going to get away with this." And the press secretary says, "April, you just keep trying." And they never did answer the question. Same with Jordan. Jordan said he would never ask the question again. He was interviewed by his paper, and he basically said that after the news conference, he was talking to Sarah Sanders, and she said, "Oh, we knew that question could be asked." Because they'd seen the story. It was all over every media, the fact that they released these videos. She said, "We knew that question could be asked, but we didn't think anybody would ask it." And when he asked it, she never came back to it. And I'm trying to contact him, and none of these reporters, I've contacted them all. I said, "What's the deal? I mean, why don't you try to get an answer? Why don't you push this issue?" And it's the idea about their press credentials. Now, and this is why I say the president has to be involved, because he has no security clearance. He's the head of state. So if you're dealing with aliens, you're dealing with a foreign country. And the only person that can negotiate or deal with a foreign country is the President of the United States. You can't have a GS-13 in the State Department dealing with aliens. You have to have, it has to go to the head of state. He's a civilian commander of the military. So if the military is running the show, the President is the head of the military. Everybody reports salutes to the President of the United States. He's the CEO of the government, so if it's the CIA or something like that, the President is the head of that thing. And he's also the head of all 17 intelligence agencies. Now, they may move him out of it. They may say, we've got this thing, you don't really need to know about it, it's plausible deniability, we keep you away from it, whatever. But to say that the president, that there's somebody, and people will say this, this guy's got 17 levels above the president. And I say, bullshit. He doesn't have it because the president doesn't have a security clearance. Everybody knows that. The president can see whatever he wants. And as they say, the military will bend over backwards to make sure the president gets what he wants. He can demand whatever he wants, and he gets it. It doesn't mean he's going to ask for it. But this is the thing, that people have, there's all these stories in the UFO community that there's somebody who's telling the president what to do. And I say, if you think someone's telling Donald Trump what to do, I think you've got to rethink your argument. Misconceptions. This is Tom DeLonge. This is where the videos are being moved to him. They're not being released to the public. They're basically being released to him. Here's the New York Times. I mentioned that before. And this is important. Where it comes to this thing where people are sort of saying to me, how do you know that you're saying this is all made, this is all planned by the government? And it's not planned by the government. It's just good reporting by the New York Times. When this happened, and I think I've even got the clips here. Hang on. So, Leslie Kean meets Elizondo. And she meets Elizondo at Pentagon, I believe it's Pentagon City, the same place that the meeting with DeLonge took place. This was released 2 days later by the New York Times, December 18th. Ralph Blumenthal, who was one of the articles, wrote a second article, and he said that Leslie Kean met with several present and former intelligence officers and a defense contractor. So it wasn't just her and Lou Elizondo. There was a bunch of former and current intelligence officers and a defense contractor who were there. And she was shown video, the videos that were released. She was shown documents. She was shown documents related to Senator Reid's involvement in this sort of thing. I work with John Greenwald, who's the top guy who does FOIAs. John Greenwald is just furious. He wrote a 27-page FOIA to get to the front of the line to get this material, and he was told, we have no records. So John Greenwald and the rest of the UFO community, there's been 1,500 FOIAs filed, maybe as many as 2,000 FOIAs filed on this New York Times story. We want to know about this Pentagon program to investigate UFOs. So 2,000 FOIAs. Nobody has gotten a document. The Defense Department says we did not release any videos. They say we don't have any records on an AATIP program. And yet you have a reporter who ends up writing for the New York Times, who has shown documents, shown videos, and we're not shown anything. And the key to this is that if it were up to us in the UFO community, we would never run with the story, because the Defense Department is saying there are no videos, there are no documents, you can't confirm anything, you're not going to go with the story. And yet the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Politico, and the guy from the Washington Post had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. The guy at the New York Times had won 1 Pulitzer Prize. These were not dummies. These were guys who had a lot of sources inside the Pentagon. So what I think happened is Blumenthal goes to the Pentagon, they give him these documents, they leak these documents, he goes into the Pentagon and he talks to his sources. He have all sorts of sources inside the Pentagon, and they will say to him, off the record, yes, this is for real. It's all for real. So he runs with the story. The New York Times would not have run with the story unless they had 2 independent sources inside the Pentagon that confirmed that the story is true. Inside the UFO community, let me guarantee you, there is nothing to back up this story. The Department of Defense is going, nope, nope, nope. Even Damon Steer phoned them up, and he said, I want to file this FOIA. Who do I file it with? And he said, sorry, sir, we did not release anything. And then he said, well, I want to file. Who should I file with? I'm sorry, sir, I can't answer that question. I'm just telling you, sir, we did not release any videos. And yet the New York Times went, and now what you see has happened. New York Times does it, Politico does it, Washington Post does it, and then CNN, Fox jump in, all the major media, and what are they saying? Fox will come out and they'll say, that they had 3 videos. So the first 2 came out in December, then in March, the third one came out. The third one came out, and you take a look, every media said the same thing. Oh, the Defense Department has just released another UFO video. Not true at all. And yet, so they've got the media on the hook. They've actually shifted the media. And what it is I'll skip the slide when I get there, but I'll just explain now. What this is what's called confirmation. In this 2013 interview with Bob Bigelow, he's asked the question by George Knapp. George Knapp says to him, are you in favor of disclosure? And Bob Bigelow says, no, I'm not in favor of disclosure. I think we should do confirmation. And so what happened in December 16th is what's called confirmation. What Bob Bigelow says, what you need to do is you need to get out the story to the American people that UFOs are real. And stop right there. And if you take a look at all the articles, that's exactly what they've done. They put out the videos, they put out the article, Defense Department is studying it as a possible threat. We got to get it before the Russians and the Chinese, and you stop right there. And all the articles will say the same thing, because the people that are feeding the story, and it's all a controlled story, they will not let small podcasts go. What they've done is that they're controlling the story, and so you have a situation where the story gets out, nobody can confirm the story, and CNN is putting it out. They'll say, the people feeding the story will say, we're not saying it's alien. We're not using that word. We're not saying it's extraterrestrial. And that's exactly what Bigelow said in 2013. You don't say alien. You don't say this stuff. You just say UFOs are real. We don't know what's going on. We're studying the problem, and you stop right there. And then a couple of years down the road, then you do disclosure. Then you add more as to what this is about. So that's exactly what they did. And I believe they did a good job, because what they've done is they've shifted the general population. If you're running for Senate or House or whatever, what you do is you're not interested. If you're a Republican, you're not going after the Democrats. They're not going to vote for you. If you're a Democrat, you're not going after the Republicans. They're not going to vote for you. You're going after the swing voters. And that's what they're doing. They're going after the people in America through the New York Times, through the Washington Post, CNN, Fox. Everybody's playing the same game. They're all on the hook. They're all saying, oh, Defense Department is releasing this stuff, which they're not. And everybody goes, oh, all the skeptics go, oh, it was true. And I've had lots of people come to me that never talk to me about UFOs and say, did you see that video? Man, did you see that video they had there? Like, they've actually, I would say, maybe even 10%. It may be like 50% believed it was for real before. Yeah, it's got to be 10% more. They've shifted a lot of people, and that's what they're doing. They're doing confirmation and not disclosure. Disclosure will come a couple of years down the road, if even then. John Burroughs and I talked about it. John had a source, I had a source. Both are saying 7-year, 2024. And the source I have says that they have everything planned. Like, there's a 60-minute interview that's going to take place. There's a bunch of stuff that they're going to drop. And they not only know what they're going to do, they have timelines. They know exactly when they're going to do it. So they know when the next video is going to drop, no matter what they say in public. This is all, from what I'm told, is all timed out. And John Burroughs was told the same thing. This is Leslie Kane talking about her interview. I went to a meeting on October 4th. That was before Lou Elizondo retired. I went October 4th, arranged by some of Lou Elizondo's colleagues who also knew me. And so they wanted me to meet with him, basically. I went down to Washington, and we spent 3 or 4 hours together, and Lou Elizondo talked to me. I was shown documentation. I was shown the videos that were released with our story, and I was told all about Harry Reid. And basically, they set up the whole story. They give everything to the Washington Post, everything to the New York Times. All they have to do is confirm it. You give them all the documents, the videos, and stuff like that, and they go with the story because it doesn't involve extraterrestrials and aliens. Washington Post got articles. So it wasn't the New York Times. Washington Post was also shown videos, and they were also shown articles. And the Washington Post, I think it was in an interview the guy did with public radio. The guy that did the interview was actually said that his Pentagon sources told him this isn't the only program. There are other programs, not just the AATIP program. And he mentioned one with CIA, which the New York Times doesn't talk about. There are other programs going on. So FOAs, I mentioned this before. We've got nothing on FOAs. It's absolutely going nowhere. The latest one, I haven't even read the article yet. This just happened. Someone got something back that said it would be over 2 years to respond. And they've got 2,000. My FOA was much simpler. I just said, I want a copy of everybody's FOIA, because I want to find out what's the New York Times asking, because they'll have inside sources. They'll mention documents, names, stuff like that. I said, I want everybody's FOIA. I don't care about the thing. I just want the 1,500 FOAs. I want to see them all. So here's the two reporters, the New York Times and the Washington Post, both Pulitzer Prize winners. Here's Lou Elizondo, and this is an interesting thing that shows how they control the story. If you are aware of UFO Congress, it's run in Phoenix every year. It's 1,500 people. It's a big conference. They wanted Lou Elizondo as sort of an end to their conference. They were going to have him attend the conference. And we did this interview with Jim Semivan, the former CIA guy, and he told us that the story was put out, that he had this medical thing, which he probably did have a medical thing, and that he couldn't attend. So UFO Congress said, well, we got the questions. All these people are sending us questions. We'd like to come down. We'll come down and interview them and ask them these questions. And then they said, no, you send us the questions and we'll interview him. So then they can take whatever interviews. It's called managing magic. It's managing the story. So they asked the questions. And so that was the story they put out. He can't come. And Congress wasn't behind this. They didn't know about this. Said he can't come. He's got this thing. And they did this interview. And we're going to show this tape, this 40-minute tape at the end of the last day. And so when we did the interview with Jim Semivan, he said, well, the reason he didn't go to Congress was because he was told not to go. And one of the people, and I won't say who it was, but one of the people sort of related to the stars made a good point. He said to him, don't go to that thing. And I know that this is the game they play. They'd say, don't go to Eureka Springs. Because if you go to Eureka Springs, you're sitting at a table, they're going to come and ask you a bunch of hardball questions. They're going to demand all this stuff. And when you answer them, you're an intelligence officer. Like Elizondo is a counterintelligence officer. He's the same as Richard Doty. He's a counterintelligence officer. When you answer them, they're not going to believe you anyway, so why would you go? And that's why he didn't go, because he was told not to go. It's a total waste of time. And I know this from knowing one of the To the Stars people from many years ago. I remember there was this story, this Reed story. I don't know if you remember this bizarre story on the West Coast. This guy's walking his dog, and then the alien ship appears, and the alien's there, and his dog chases it, and the alien hits the dog, and it disintegrates, and this guy takes a stick, and he hits the alien. It's this totally bizarre story. But when I saw it, I thought, if this guy's hoaxing, this is the most amazing story I've ever seen. Whatever they paid him, it was worth it. It was just an incredible story. And he had pictures, and the alien was in the freezer, and all this sort of stuff. So when he came back to UFO Congress the second time, one of the To the Stars people related to the stars was with me. And I was actually helping this person start their career. And I said, oh, you got to see this story, man. This is the most amazing story ever. Come on in. And the people that were with this person said, no, don't go in the room. Don't go in the room. So they'll go to a conference and they'll speak if they're lecturing or whatever, or they will send in tape stuff, or they will do interviews in the hotel room or whatever, but they won't go in because we're the crazy people. And that's what they've done in this thing. We're not the crazy people. They got in the New York Times. We're not those crazy people at Eureka Springs. We're not those people. We don't know if it's ET. We don't know what's going on. And it dumbs it down so the New York Times can run the story and not do like the alien story. So when you see the interviews, they will always back away. We're not saying it's alien, because everybody said, and they get mad, oh, these reporters all they want to know is it's alien. And then they say, well, we're not saying it's alien. And they're trying to back off that story. Now, I'll do quickly this, and then maybe I'll just skip to the experiencer thing. This is a story that happened, UFOs and Henry Kissinger. This is a story that I got many, many years ago, and I was on The Dark Journalist about a month ago, and they had this story about this guy. Nixon gives this guy the letter, and he's supposed to take it to Kissinger, and I'm not sure I believe the story. But anyway, they had me on there, and they were talking about this, and I forgot on the show to do the Henry Kissinger thing, because this message was supposed to go to Henry Kissinger. And I got a Henry Kissinger story you probably never heard. Henry Kissinger was the National Security Advisor, and he was also the state guy for Nixon. And he called it, and I've never been able to track this quote down. Henry Kissinger apparently called the UFO subject the biggest hot potato ever. Nobody wants to touch it. And I wrote this story up in my website. It's called UFO Hocus Pocus, the story of Falcon. I read up this story about Henry Kissinger. Here's the story. December 24th, 1988, I'm in a phone conversation with Bill Steinman. Bill Steinman was a very prominent researcher at the time. He was sort of like Nancy, who preceded me. It was sort of like, I'm not going to give up. I'm phoning. Hey, you're not going to answer? I'll go and meet you in person. He was that type of guy. He was just like, nobody scared him. He didn't care who he talked to. He didn't care how he got the answer. He was bugging people. So I have this interview on Christmas Eve of 1988, and Bill wrote the book, The UFO Crash at Aztec. That's what he's sort of famous for. And he basically pulled out. He had a bunch of bizarre stuff happen, threat stuff. He had a religious aspect to it. And one day I phoned him up. He said, I'm out of it, Grant. I destroyed all my files. Don't ever phone me again. I went, oh, okay. And so he just pulled out instantly, and he's never really gotten back in. But he was big in the 1980s. And he was the guy that discovered Dr. Eric Walker. We chased Walker around for 8 years. He's the guy that discovered Walker. And confirmed that Walker had been at a set of briefings on a crashed flying saucer in 1950. And Walker was the head of Penn State University, head of the chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis. He was a pretty powerful guy. So anyway, he finds out that Dr. Eric Wang, he discovers this story, that Wang was the head of Special Studies Department at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it ran until from 1949 to 1956 is when he worked. And this program, I think, started in 1952, and Wang was in charge of this program. And it had to do with reverse engineering crash flying saucers. And it was called, important, it was called a Special Studies Program. And he had taught it at University of Cincinnati. And the unit was moved in 1956 to Kirtland Air Force Base. And the important part about that is that's where Richard Doty was. And everybody says Richard Doty was all a scam, whatever. There was lots of stuff going on at Kirtland Air Force Base. So this program, reverse engineering stuff, that was run by Dr. Eric Wang, was moved to Kirtland Air Force Base. And Steinman discovers this whole thing. So Wang dies in 1960, and Steinman gets a hold of this, and he decides he's going to phone Wang's wife, whose name was Maria. And she was a high-profile, I can't remember what her job was, but she was a high-profile person herself. So he contacts her, and this is the transcript. He said, he's talking to her in this phone conversation. I wrote a letter to you on the 23rd of March regarding Dr. Eric Wang and his work involving the analysis on recovered flying saucers and the attempted duplication of them. And she says, yes, I do remember that letter, but I no longer have it. I turned it over to the authorities, military intelligence at Kirtland Air Force Base. So Steinman says, can you tell me something about Dr. Wang's involvement in the flying saucer program? He doesn't care. He doesn't give up. He just keeps asking questions. And so she says, how did you know that Dr. Wang was involved in that kind of work? And why do you want to know about that? Who are you? How do I know I can trust you? And so he keeps talking to her, and Maria suggests that Bill talk to Dr. Henry Kissinger. And so he, of course, says, well, why should I talk to Kissinger? And then she said she had met Kissinger many times in her husband's study at outside of Kirtland Air Force Base, that he was there all the time. And this is so between 1956 and 1960, Henry Kissinger was dealing with her husband in his study all the time. He was there as the head of the Rockefeller-funded Special Studies Project. And I go look it up. Sure enough, Rockefeller was the head of the Special Studies Program. And here's the flow chart for the program. It was started by Nelson Rockefeller. They produced this prospect for America, and Henry Kissinger ran the whole thing. So she's basically saying, like 30 years ago, that he was the head of the Special Studies Program, and it involved UFOs, and that he was, and it was confirmed. So it was Nelson Rockefeller that started. Henry Kissinger was running it for him. And what you see, this is a thing with the sort of non-government offices or boards. The guy that has the most boards is Henry Kissinger, on 111 different boards, like aerospace boards, like non-government boards. And the second guy is James Woolsey, and he's like big time into UFOs as well. He's the guy, Ron Pandolfi, when he told the story about briefing Donald Trump, it was James Woolsey and a guy by the name of Mike Pillsbury who were in him briefing Donald Trump on UFOs. So you get these high-level guys who sort of show that these non-government things, these guys are involved, and they all have the connection to UFOs. Brzezinski was the same thing. If you take a look at 1954 Cutler-Twining memo that was released by Bill Moore and with the MJ-12 document, you'll see that the MJ-12 was a special studies project as well. And so it ties into this thing with the Rockefeller thing was a special studies program as well. And the interesting thing about this thing here, the classification was top secret restricted. And I recovered some documents years ago from what's called the UFO Working Group. It was run by John Alexander, and all these spooks, all these defense people are all trying to figure out about UFOs, almost like the Tom DeLonge thing. A lot of those people that were in this John Alexander group are into the stars. They just gravitate. They go from the Bill Moore group to the Firmage group to the John Alexander group to Big Bob Bigelow's group, and it's wherever there's money and wherever there's intelligence on figuring out UFO stuff, all these same guys are trying to figure this thing out. Their whole life, they've had some interaction. Say you're in your job and you had one UFO case you worked on, and you become fascinated, and you've got a security clearance, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And these guys move from these different groups. So the restriction, it was top secret restricted on the Cutler-Twining memo from '54, and then you look at John Alexander's, and this is the front page, is top secret restricted as well. It's the same classification as the MJ-12 document. So he says, 2 days after he talks to Maria Wang, Steinman is talking, he says, I get a phone call from Bill Moore. He phones me up and he asks me, why are you bugging Mrs. Wang? And then, so Steinman says, well, how'd you know that? How'd you know I'm talking to Mrs. Wang? And Moore said, I've got intelligence sources. You got to remember, Bill Moore was like Tom DeLonge. He had gotten all these people inside the intelligence operation, military people, who all had bird names, and he was picking these people for information. So he said, I've got intelligence sources. So Moore asked whether Steinman had talked to Dorothy at the library. So he brings up Dorothy. Did you talk to Dorothy in the library? As if like there's lots of people there to talk to. It's not just Wang. There's all sorts of UFO people there. And he said, no, I didn't talk to her. And so Moore began to recount parts of the conversation. And then Steinman got really upset. When he started to quote what he was saying, he realized this thing had been taped, and Bill Moore had heard the tape. And he was furious. He said, how do you know I was talking to Mrs. Wang? And so Bill says, come over to my house tomorrow night, and I'll tell you. So he goes in there, and Bill says, here's what happened. When he was at university, Bill was completely fluent in reading and writing Russian. And when he was at university, he was recruited by the CIA. And he said, I really didn't work for them. I did a couple of little projects for them. I didn't work for them. And then I left, and he got a job as a school teacher. And when he got into the UFO thing, he went back and reestablished his contacts inside the CIA. And his view was the CIA was working for him. So this is the thing. He basically says, I'm CIA. That's how I've got these contacts, and we know what you're talking about, and leave Mrs. Wang alone. And so he renewed his contacts. So Steinman followed up on a lot of Bill Moore's contacts. There was all these other people that Bill Moore had, and I've heard some of the names, and he was following all these people and talking to them, and they were screaming at him on the phone to get off. Now let's go, because I've only got, I'm going to go to the experiencer thing. Let's go down. Medals. There's all these medals. There's with Bob Bigelow. Linda Howe has done work on one of them. There's about 4 different types of medals. There's the implant medals. There's the stuff that the UFOs have been shooting out. They've got that medal that Valet's looking at. They shoot out and they grab this medal. And everybody always said, oh, it's just scrap metal. You know, these people made up the story, whatever. They don't believe that anymore. This is a piece from a crash site that I was given, and I had to give it back. I cut off a little piece and gave it back. And there's one of the Cosmic Club people tells this story about being blindfolded and taken to this site, which is right here. Was taken to this site where there's a crash in New Mexico, and I went, as soon as I heard it, because I knew the guy from NASA who took her there, and I'm thinking, I know where that site is. I mean, why is he blindfolding her? I mean, I know where the site is. I know all this metal and stuff. But this is the thing. This metal they've got as well, and there's all sorts of pieces from this site of metal that this would be with Bigelow now. Here's this stuff. And my entry to Cabal, I'll skip over this. Basically, it said that I was going to be handling I claimed I was going to handle cross saucer wreckage at the Bohemian at a secret society site outside of San Francisco. It was actually the Bohemian Grove. I never was invited. And Jack Sarfati was running this thing. And what they were going to do, the New York Times knew about this. New York Times didn't pick up the story. They were going to show a guy was going to talk about the crash metal, and they were going to talk about UFO propulsion. And the girl that was working with me was trying to get the New York Times story to do it for them. They wouldn't touch the story. But this was actually, the New York Times knew all about this story at the Bohemian Grove, and it was kind of weird. This is Kevin Albert. This is the guy who, Tuesday night, got the message from the alien that took the film. He's with my friend Chris Bledsoe, and so the Bohemian Grove, and this was the thing. And I never got invited. That's the whole gist of the story. And it was a place where women weren't allowed. This Marine was from Psychology Today, wanted to go, and he said, women aren't allowed there. And I was asking people, like, what, is there a new executive order? Like, what, is there a place in America where women can't go? And it's an actual place. Women can't be on the site after 9 o'clock at night and before 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm going like, wow. Well, they said they got 24-hour security. They got machine gun security. You can't take a phone in there. You can't take a camera in there. And I'm thinking, wow, I mean, I can't believe there's even such a place. This is Ron Pandolfi. This is with my friend Doug Alt, who's an artist. His wife's an artist, so they're very interesting. He hears stuff from time to time. But this is Ron Pandolfi, and Doug does all these whistleblower things. So Doug is an artist. He paints all these whistleblower people. This is Maureen, who was invited. She was invited, I was not. And the story ended up on the internet that I was claiming I was going to go. I didn't. I had these people who were going to go. She was told she couldn't go because she's a woman. Then she had to be off the site by 9 o'clock. And they actually go. So here's the The trip to the mountain, this is how it starts, April 6th. This is this thing about the portal thing that happened that we still haven't got confirmed. This is a guy that claims there's 2 more videos coming out. And the idea that they said, well, no, it's not true. They were going after this guy. No, it's not true. And here's a photo, Tom DeLonge at NASA. So he was there. Here's 2 experiencers at the table. The guy at the head of the table is an experiencer, is my friend Chris Bledsoe. This is in the conference room, the astronauts' conference room. There's only been 250 people ever in that room. This is where they go just before they launch. And they've got 2 experiencers. The guy on the end had a dramatic experience. And that's what you got to remember. A lot of these people that are involved, and he was talking to me, a lot of these people have amazing experiences. Like this guy had the beings in his room too as well. He had a company, he developed a company, sold the company for $100 million. I don't know how much of it was for the UFO thing, but he said, I'll tell you what, Grant, the morning I awoke with that idea in my head, the last thing I remembered the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. And I said, oh, cool, you should be regressed. And he said, well, I think I might try that. And even him, if you look at being ostracized, like Nancy was talking about, her family is very much against this whole thing. He has the same thing. Here's a guy who sold this company for millions of dollars, whatever, and got this invention on, they put this invention on the space shuttle that he was downloaded, and they said it wouldn't work, and he got some guy to put it on there, whatever, and went on there, and it worked. And his daughter said, he told me, my daughter tells me, Dad, why don't you quit talking about that UFO stuff? I don't like it when you talk about that stuff. And he just said to her, remember where the Lexus came from. And then she shut up. So even at high levels, people are getting told. There's another interview. I just want to say here, there's another interview. I was involved in the questions because they said this whole thing is sometimes the reporters don't ask the right questions. So I was there's a TV show being done. I was being interviewed, and then they said they were interviewing Reed. And I said, you're interviewing Reed? You got an interview with Reed? And they go, yeah, but don't tell anybody. I said, can I add some questions? And they said, sure. So the question you want to ask, if you've got a high-level government official or whatever, or president, vice president, or whatever, 4-star general, you ask them. You don't ask them if you're interested in UFOs. You say, did you ever get briefed? Someone walk in your office, swear you to secrecy, and tell you what the UFO story is about. And so we put these questions. I gave a bunch of these questions. Then she gave me the questions beforehand. And then I said to her, maybe you better just leave all the questions out and just pretend you thought of the briefing question during it, because if you ask him give him all these questions before the interview, he's going to get political flu and he ain't showing up for the interview. So I don't know what happened. This interview has been done, and we'll see how he answers these questions. Oh, this is an interesting story. I'll tell this, and then I'll go to the experiencer thing. This is James Irwin. This is a story that's sort of making the rounds now. A friend of mine wrote the Charlie Red Star book in a small town. The guy who owned the airport, this is about 20 years ago, I was with him, and he says to me, he said, I had this experience. James Irwin comes to lecture there, and he's into building World War II planes. They're both into this thing. Comes to my hangar, and my wife, Elaine, leaves the hangar. And as soon as Elaine leaves the hangar, James Irwin looks over at me, and he says, Bob, I'm going to tell you something. If you ever repeat it, I will deny I ever said it. He said, when we landed on the moon, Apollo 15, we landed, a UFO landed about a mile away from us. And here is, I went back and I looked at the videos, and you can actually see on the Apollo 15 video, you can see on the right-hand side. Now, whether that's the object. But anyway, he tells the story to my friend Bob. And he said, it landed, and we radioed Houston, and we said, Houston, something has landed here, and we'd like to take the rover, and we'd like to go over and say howdy. And Houston says, stand by. 30-second pause, and Houston comes back on and said, you're instructed to go about what you're to do and ignore it. And so he tells the story, and then Bob was going to go on live and tell the story on the record, and then somebody working for him at the hangar said, Bob, his wife, he's dead now, his wife will sue you if you bring out this story. So then he sort of kept quiet, and then I started checking the stories, and I went to, he was going to do an interview with Frank Stranges in Los Angeles. And I heard that he'd pulled out the day before. So it took me a while to get a hold of Frank Stranges. I said, Frank, you're running a conference in Los Angeles. You're going to have James Irwin. He said, yes. I said, he pulled out the day before. He said, yeah, he gave me the check back, and he said, I can't do it. I've got a pension. I can't do it. And I said, what was he going to lecture on? And he said he was going to lecture on what happened on the moon. So I had a second confirmation. This third confirmation has just happened. This is a friend of mine from Toronto, and I don't know if he's replied to me yet. But this is drawn by Irwin's 6-year-old, I don't know, it's Jan. I don't know if it's his son. He had 4 kids or 5 kids. I don't know if it was the boy or the girl. But here you have this drawing done by his 6-year-old child, which has Irwin, Scott, who is the other guy on the moon, and you have these aliens, and you have the ones behind the mountain. And that's where that object in that picture was. So you have this sort of a confirmation that, yes, something may have happened on the moon. Now we get to the experiencer thing. This is the book of my associate who's with me here, Podesta Barnaby. And she's, this is the way I interpret this thing with experiencers. I say experiencers are the only thing you need to worry about. Because what this comes down to is the ability to dissociate, the ability to shut down the rational ego mind, to shut out the material world, and move into this conscious field where these beings, whether they're aliens, angels, whatever they are, you move into that field. And Desta is able to disassociate. She's able to tune in. And what's happened, there's 4 different aspects to the, as I mentioned before, there's 4 different aspects to the stars thing. And most of them, I don't think are going anywhere because you can't prove it with videos. You can move the public, but you can't really prove anything. The final one is the experiencer. Most of the stories, most people don't know that they have a very serious operation going on in To the Stars on experiencers. And the way it was described by Jim Semivan is it's not really To the Stars. It's sort of part of To the Stars, but it's not. It's more secret, part of the operation. So I'm going to play an audio here. And this audio it leaked onto the internet. I was given it about a month ago. Even John Burroughs hadn't heard it. He said, I've never heard this video, or this audio. The guy that you're going to hear on the thing is Kit Green. And if you talk to Richard Dolan, we were talking about it last night. If Kit Green says something, you can take it to the bank. He had the same job as Ron Pandolfi, but he doesn't play the games at Ron Pandolfi. He's a very, very serious guy. If he knows not to talk about it, he just says, it's illegal, I can't talk about it. When this thing leaked, it was the customer, it was the client who leaked the video. So here's what they're doing, and this is part of this audio. What they're doing is because the people that are involved, the thing is run by Hal Puthoff, who ran the remote viewing program in the 1970s. It's run by Kit Green, who was the CIA control officer for the remote viewing program in the 1970s, and who ran the Weir desk, the CIA desk at CIA. And it's run by Gary Nolan, who's a genetics guy at Stanford University. And these guys have been nominated for Nobel Prizes. These aren't low-level guys. These guys are running this operation with experiencers. And what you're going to hear on this tape, I'm just going to play maybe a minute or 30 seconds of this thing. You're going to hear Kit Green explaining what's going on. Now, Kit Green is a physiologist, so he's interested. And what they have done, they're looking at 2 different things. What they say is, if you're highly psychic, like Desta is, or if you're an experiencer, you're in the same camp. And what they're looking at, is there something unique? As I said before, the government cannot control the phenomena or measure the phenomena, so they watch the people that the phenomena is affecting. So what they want to do is they want to say, is there something unique about experiencers that will determine that they're not just making up stories? So what they're looking at is they're looking at DNA, and what Gary Nolan says is that the DNA, everything that happens in your life leaves what he calls a DNA marker. So they can tell when you had a cold, when you had the flu, it leaves a DNA marker. And that every experiencer and every highly psychic person, they've got Uri Geller's DNA, they got Swan, McMonagle, they got all that DNA. All of them have, from one of the people in the program, now I didn't hear it from them, I heard from one of the clients, that there's a marker. And he told me it was from birth, that there's a marker that determines. So if you're an experiencer, if this works out, and the other thing, let me explain. The other thing is everybody's got what they call an antenna brain pattern, which was extremely important to me because I work with these experiencer these contactees from Latin America who have these people who do C5s on steroids. They can tell you when the UFO, to the minute, when it's going to appear. And they're called antennas. So I was very interested that these people have the DNA marker and they have this brain pattern that determines. So what you can do, and this is the advantage of what this thing is, if you have an experiencer, it's no longer, that's what they tell me. Experiencers, you can't believe experiencers. They just believe they're on the ship. I mean, it's just anecdotal. It doesn't really mean anything. And, hang on. So this way, if they do get the, the DNA marker, then what's going to happen is that you can actually go for a test. And you can actually prove you're an experiencer. And if you can prove this, what they're trying to do, they told me to sort of back off, not to really push it, because they're trying to do peer-reviewed papers. So they're talking to very skeptical scientists who are still in that nuts and bolts world, and they're going to show on a thing that all experiencers have this pattern, brain pattern, have this thing, so you can actually do it. And then people are going to go, okay, it's not anecdotal. They're not making it up. They actually are. And then you can get to the point where you're actually doing research. You can bring the psychologists in to work on this part, a neurologist to work on this part, because it actually validates the phenomena. So I think they're doing a great work, and they've got 100 people in this program. So they're talking about, Kid Green is on the tape, and he's one of the guys that runs it. Very, very powerful, reliable guy. And he's talking, what they've done on this tape that you're going to hear is they're using remote viewers. So what they do is they're taking people who've been injured, and a lot of them they think have been injured by black ops technology. There's an electromagnetic field, people are injured, so they take the injured person. Plus, Kid Green, I was told Kid Green's job was, if there's 2% of experiencers in this room, there's going to be 2% of experiencers in high-level government. So if you're the President of the United States and you say, you know, last night I had a strange dream, I was on this ship, I was on a table, they send you to Kid Green. Kid Green is this guy who knows, he's been taken by the Russians? Is he crazy? Or has he been on a ship? He knows. And all these high-level people. So Kid Green is this very reliable guy. So what he's going to talk about here, you're going to hear, is this program's going on, and they're using remote viewers. So all these people who've been injured, or who they believe are very psychic, or very sort of right-brained, or experiencers, they take these people, and they give them target numbers. And you don't hear that part of the tape, but they say somebody's 001. So then they take the remote viewer and they say, okay, we got target 001. Tell us about the person. And then the woman's talking, and the Kid Green goes, stop. And then okay. And then she keeps going. And Kid Green claims these two remote viewers they're using are 95% accurate. So Kid Green will run through this thing, and then he says, okay, now who are they dealing with? And the one part of the tape I was going to play, but I'm not going to, the woman's going, oh, it's this type of alien, and there's a portal off the west coast of the United States, down below the water and stuff. And this is what they're doing. I mean, they're leading edge, but they don't want, it's not public, because you got to realize these guys are trying to do peer-reviewed papers, but this is the kind of stuff that you can see, and I'm very encouraged by this. So here's Kid Green, and he's talking about a sponsor. So they've got money, somebody's sponsoring this program. And I think it's a big program, and I wish them the best. These are high-level guys, and they actually are trying to do the right thing. Here's Kit Green describing the program.
And the sponsor is interested in one dimension of that experiment, and I'm interested in the second. Carol's interested in the third, and here the dimensions are. I'm interested in the dimension of showing that quantum connectivity between two proven, competent telepaths can be measured with simultaneity in terms of the portions of the brain that are activated. That is now possible to do. I don't do the math to do it, but I know how to determine what portions of the midbrain connected to the caudate and the putamen, connected to the prefrontal cortex, and connected to the part of the brain that does imaging, is all related to each other. That's something that right now is a very, very rich area of my world of MRI. Hal is the expert in knowing how to design the experiment.
Okay.
And the sponsor is interested in having an experiment design where the thing that you do and the thing that Uri does happen to be identical to each other. Okay? Both you and Uri have asserted, and in your case, you have, in my judgment, proven. In Uri's case, I can't say that the connectivities that you get for the acquisition of information includes the others.
Oh, yes.
Okay, now, our sponsor is interested in the latter.
Yeah, I know he is.
Hal is interested in the former.
Okay, so I'm going to end here. This is just to give you an idea of what they're doing. One of the things that, and Kid Green has been trying to do this since 2008, and you hear Uri Geller's name. What they wanted to do is they put Uri Geller in one MRI, say in Israel. They put a remote viewer or an experiencer in another MRI in California, and the one sends a target to the other. And what they're trying to determine is consciousness non-local, or does it take a couple of seconds for the signal? Is it non-local? And so they're working on that. And the other thing that I heard was that they're doing a thing, because what it comes down to is the ability to get into there. So I do this thing. Forrest was actually talking the other night. We were just sort of blown away when he started talking about flying the craft. The way the craft is flown is you do it with your mind. You put your hand on a pad, you become one with the craft, and then you can think, and the craft goes wherever you want. And so they're doing they know this principle that once you're in contact with it, that it's not that everybody can't do it, but some people have the antenna; they can tap into it. And the example was Chris Bledsoe, who's a very, very sort of famous experiencer friend of mine. John Alexander goes to check this out. The sponsor sends him to check out Chris Bledsoe, and he goes down there, and they're sitting there along the Cape Fear River, where his first major experience happened in 2007 with the 5 witnesses and 5 aliens and 14 UFOs that night, and just bizarre story. And John and they're sitting there talking, and all of a sudden Chris goes, "They're here. They're here." And John says, "What do you mean they're here?" "They're here. I know they're here." And John says, "Well, how do you know that?" "I don't know. I just know they're here." And they're sitting there, and all of a sudden, boom, this UFO flies over their head and takes off. And John is a pretty skeptical guy. He goes, he wrote a chapter in his book. He was just blown away. And that's the idea, that the experiencers, mediums, psychics, their ability to dissociate, to tap into this thing. And so one of the experiments I had heard, now whether this is true or not, is they're actually thinking of, you bring somebody, an experiencer, and say, okay, bring it in. And see it. I think it's coming off this Chris Bledsoe thing. Can you bring them in? And that's why they're so interested in this thing. And I think that if they can prove this, if they can get these peer-reviewed papers in that show that experiencers actually are unique compared to everybody else in the society, I think that is the thing that could break this thing wide open. Because the experiencers, the problem is they've got all the answers. 40% say at some time during their experience they knew the answer to everything. 42% say they have mathematical, technical, scientific material in their head that they did not learn in school. 37%, 7 times the national average, have near-death experiences. 50% have been healed. 78% say there's telepathy involved. You have all these patterns, but nobody's listening to everybody now because this is anecdotal. Oh, well, it's just anecdotal. As Gary Nolan, the guy at Stanford, said, and I'll close with this, he said, genetics doesn't lie. So if they can prove genetically, it's over. The experiencers will start to be listened to, and that's what I say. If you want to understand this phenomenon, you have no choice. You may not be able to figure it out, but the only chance you've got is to talk to the experiencers. Thank you.